He thought denying her a room was just standard policy, but in less than an hour, that single decision would cost him everything he had built. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The grand lobby of the Astoria Grand Hotel shimmered under warm golden lights, marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers above, the kind of place where a single night could cost more than most people's monthly rent. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses moved with quiet confidence, their polished shoes clicking softly across the floor. And then, the glass doors opened. Emily Carter stepped inside, pulling a slightly worn navy suitcase behind her. Her sneakers carried the dust of a long journey, her simple cardigan wrinkled from hours of travel. She paused for a moment, taking in the towering ceilings and the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume, her expression calm, almost detached. She had been in places like this before, just not like this. At the front desk, a young receptionist glanced up briefly, her practiced smile flickering before fading just as quickly. Her eyes traveled from Emily's suitcase to her clothes, then back to her screen. "Next guest, please," she called, her tone shifting as a well-dressed couple stepped forward, cutting ahead without hesitation. Emily didn't protest. She simply stood there, hands resting lightly on the handle of her suitcase, waiting. Minutes passed. 10, maybe more. Guests came and went. Credit cards slid across polished counters. Keys were handed over with polite nods. And still, Emily stood there, invisible in plain sight. Finally, she stepped forward again, her voice soft but steady. "Excuse me, I'd like to check in." This time, the receptionist hesitated. Her smile returned, but it was thinner now, less welcoming. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" Emily nodded. "Yes, under Carter." The receptionist typed quickly, her expression tightening almost immediately. She paused, then glanced over her shoulder. "Mr. Hayes," she called. From across the lobby, a man in a sharp charcoal suit approached, his posture straight, his expression already carrying quiet authority. Victor Hayes, the hotel's general manager, had built his reputation on maintaining the Astoria's exclusive image. And in his world, appearances were everything. He stopped just short of the counter, his eyes sweeping over Emily in a single, calculated glance. "Is there a problem?" he asked, though his tone suggested he had already decided the answer. The receptionist leaned in slightly, lowering her voice, but not enough to escape the ears of those nearby. "Reservation under Carter, but," she trailed off, her eyes flicking again toward Emily's outfit. Victor's lips pressed into a thin line before he turned fully toward Emily. "Ma'am," he began, his voice smooth but edged with something colder. "This property caters to a very specific clientele. I believe there may have been a misunderstanding." A subtle shift rippled through the lobby. Conversations quieted. A few guests glanced over, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Emily didn't move. Her hands remained steady on her suitcase. "There's no misunderstanding," she said calmly. "I have a confirmed reservation." Victor gave a short, humorless smile. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emily tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "That's strange," she replied softly. "Because I booked this room 2 weeks ago." Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled, but loud enough for others to hear. "Let me be direct. Guests who stay here typically present themselves accordingly. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere, less exclusive." A few quiet chuckles echoed from nearby. The room tightened, and for the first time, a faint silence began to settle, as if something unseen had just shifted beneath the surface. Emily's eyes didn't waver, not even for a second. Victor Hayes held her gaze for a moment longer, expecting hesitation, maybe even embarrassment, the kind of reaction he had seen countless times before when someone realized they were out of place. But Emily Carter did not flinch. She did not look away, and that alone unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The marble floor beneath them seemed to amplify the silence spreading across the lobby as nearby conversations faded into low murmurs. People were watching now, not openly, but enough to feel it in the air, the subtle shift of attention, the quiet curiosity that always followed a moment of tension in a place built on appearances. Victor adjusted his cuff slightly, a small gesture to regain control. "I suggest you check your confirmation again," he said, his tone firmer now, less polished. "Perhaps you booked a different property." Emily slowly reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, her movements unhurried, deliberate. She tapped the screen and turned it toward him, the reservation confirmation glowing clearly. Dates, room type, payment already processed, everything in perfect order. For a fraction of a second, Victor's expression flickered, but it disappeared just as quickly as it came, replaced by a tight, professional smile that did not reach his eyes. "Online systems can make errors," he replied smoothly, though the confidence in his voice had thinned. "We cannot accommodate every request." A quiet ripple moved through the small crowd that had formed. A man in a navy suit whispered something to his companion. A woman near the lounge area crossed her arms, watching more closely now. Emily lowered her phone but did not put it away. "So you are refusing to honor a paid reservation," she said, her voice still calm, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it now, something steady and unyielding. Victor took a step closer, lowering his voice again, but not enough to hide the edge. "I am saying that this establishment maintains a standard," he said, "and we reserve the right to decide who fits that standard." The words landed heavier than he intended, and this time, there was no laughter, no amused glances, just a growing stillness, the kind that made even the most confident person aware that something had shifted. Emily's fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her suitcase, not in anger, but in control. She glanced briefly around the lobby, taking in the chandeliers, the polished desks, the people who had stopped pretending not to listen, and for a brief moment, something passed through her expression, not hurt, not even frustration, but recognition, as if she had seen this moment before in a different place, under different lights. "I understand," she said quietly, and those two words seemed to catch Victor off guard more than any argument could have. He straightened, expecting resistance, escalation, something he could push back against, but instead, Emily simply nodded once, as if confirming something only she could see. She reached down, adjusting the strap of her suitcase, preparing to leave, without another word, and that was when the tension in the room tightened even further, because there was something about the way she moved, the absence of desperation, the quiet dignity in her posture, that did not match the role Victor had assigned to her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it lingered, like a note out of place in an otherwise perfect melody. Victor turned slightly, already signaling to security with a brief glance. Two uniformed staff members near the entrance straightened, ready to step forward if needed, but Emily did not wait for them. She did not argue, did not plead. She simply took a step back from the counter, her eyes meeting Victor's one last time, steady, unreadable, and in that moment, something flickered again behind his confidence, a small, unwelcome doubt that he quickly buried, because in his world, decisions like this were simple, necessary even. Maintain the image, protect the brand, remove what does not belong. That was the rule, and he had followed it without hesitation. The only problem was, he had no idea that the quiet woman standing in front of him was not leaving defeated. She was leaving certain, and just beyond the glass doors, unseen by everyone inside. A black sedan had already pulled to a stop, its engine still running, waiting. The glass doors whispered open as Emily Carter stepped out into the cool evening air, the city lights reflecting softly against the polished surface of the waiting black sedan, its engine humming with quiet precision. She did not rush, did not look back, but there was a subtle pause in her step, as if she could still feel the weight of the eyes inside the lobby, the judgment, the dismissal, the quiet laughter that had filled the air only moments ago, and yet her expression remained unchanged. Calm, composed, almost distant, the driver stepped out immediately, straightening his jacket as he moved to open the rear door. "Good evening, ma'am," he said respectfully, his tone measured, familiar. Emily gave a small nod. "Good evening, Thomas," she replied softly, placing her suitcase gently into his hands. There was no urgency in her movements, no trace of frustration, only a quiet certainty that seemed to settle around her like a shield. Inside the Astoria Grand, the tension had not lifted, if anything. It had deepened. Victor Hayes stood near the front desk, arms loosely crossed, watching through the glass as the sedan idled outside. Something about the scene did not sit right with him. It was not unusual for guests to arrive in luxury vehicles. This was that kind of hotel. But something about this moment felt different. The timing, the stillness, the way the driver carried himself. Precise, disciplined, not like hired convenience, but like someone accustomed to protocol. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. He turned back toward the receptionist. "Make sure the lobby clears," he said quietly. "We do not need unnecessary attention." But the attention was already there. Guests lingered just a little longer than usual. Conversation slowed. Eyes drifted back toward the entrance again and again, as if everyone was waiting for something they could not quite name. Outside, Emily settled into the back seat, the door closing with a soft, definitive sound. Thomas returned to the driver's seat, but did not start moving immediately. Instead, he glanced briefly into the rearview mirror. "Would you like me to call him?" he asked carefully. Emily's gaze remained forward, her reflection faint in the tinted glass. She took a slow breath, considering, not out of uncertainty, but out of intention. Moments like this were never about impulse. They were about choice, and choices carried weight. Finally, she nodded once. "Yes," she said simply. Thomas reached for his phone. Dialing a number from memory, the line connected almost instantly. No waiting, no redirection, just a quiet acknowledgement on the other end. "Sir," Thomas said, his tone shifting subtly, more formal now. "There has been an issue." Inside the hotel, Victor was already moving, though he could not explain why. Something in his instincts had shifted, a small, persistent unease pressing against the confidence he had built over years of managing situations just like this. He glanced again toward the doors, just in time to see the driver raise a phone to his ear, and in that moment, something cold settled in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but the unmistakable sense that a line had been crossed, and whatever came next would not be contained within the polished walls of the Astoria Grand. Back in the car, Emily closed her eyes briefly, not in defeat, but in quiet reflection. She had seen this pattern before, different places, different faces, the same assumptions, the same quiet dismissal dressed up as policy, and every time, it revealed more about them than it ever did about her. The call ended quickly. Thomas placed the phone down, his hands returning to the wheel, but he did not start the engine just yet. "He is on his way," he said, and for the first time, there was the slightest shift in Emily's expression, not relief, not satisfaction, but something deeper, something that carried both patience and inevitability. Inside the hotel, Victor straightened his tie again, forcing the unease down, reminding himself that he was in control, that this was his domain, his rules, his standards. But even as he turned away from the glass, the lobby seemed quieter than before, heavier, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting, and somewhere beyond those doors, the next move had already begun. The city outside moved as it always did, cars passing, lights shifting, people unaware that something invisible had just been set in motion. Inside the black sedan, Emily Carter remained still, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her breathing even, controlled, while across town, several miles away, a different kind of movement had begun. In a glass office high above the skyline, Daniel Carter stood near the window, his reflection faint against the darkening sky. The call had lasted less than 20 seconds, but it was enough, more than enough. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He did not need details, because the tone in Thomas's voice had already told him everything he needed to know. There had been disrespect, public, deliberate, and directed at someone who never demanded attention, never used her position, never asked for special treatment. And that was precisely why it mattered. Daniel adjusted his cuff slowly, his expression unreadable, calm in a way that often made people underestimate him. But those who knew him understood that this calm was not absence of reaction. It was control before action. He reached for his phone again, dialing a different number. This time the response was immediate, sharper, more alert. "Yes, sir." A voice answered. Daniel's tone remained level, almost quiet. "I need a full operational pause at the Astoria Grand," he said, each word measured, leaving no room for interpretation. There was a brief silence on the other end, not confusion, but recognition of what that request meant. Understood. The voice replied, and just like that, a chain reaction began. Back at the hotel, Victor Hayes was walking the length of the lobby, his steps controlled, his posture firm, but the unease had not left him. It had settled deeper now, quiet, persistent, like a pressure he could not quite identify. The receptionist glanced at him nervously. "Everything is fine, right?" she asked in a low voice. Victor gave a short nod, more for himself than for her. "Of course," he said, though his eyes drifted again toward the doors, as if expecting something to happen, and then it did, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that was far more unsettling. The front desk computer screen flickered, just for a second. The receptionist frowned, tapping a key. "That is strange," she murmured, before the system refreshed again, this time slower. Then the reservation system froze entirely. "Sir?" she said, a note of concern creeping into her voice, across the lobby. Another staff member spoke up. "Our booking system just went offline." A guest at the bar looked up as the digital menu screen dimmed, then reset. One by one, small disruptions began to ripple through the building, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Victor's jaw tightened. He stepped behind the desk, looking at the screen himself. "Restart it," he said sharply. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew this was not a simple glitch. The timing was too precise, too immediate. The air in the lobby shifted again. Heavier now. Conversations stopped completely. Guests exchanged looks. The quiet confidence that once filled the space had been replaced by uncertainty. And then, the doors opened again. But this time, no one spoke, no one moved, because the presence that entered did not ask for attention. It commanded it. Daniel Carter walked in with measured steps, his gaze steady, his expression calm, but there was something in the way the room responded, an instinctive stillness, as if everyone could feel the weight of something they did not yet understand. Victor turned toward him, his professional composure snapping back into place, ready to handle another guest, another situation. But the moment their eyes met, something shifted again, sharper this time, unmistakable. Daniel did not raise his voice, did not gesture. He simply stopped a few feet from the desk and spoke. "I believe there has been a mistake." And the room, already silent, somehow became even quieter, as if the next few moments were about to change everything. Victor Hayes held his posture, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, the practiced confidence of a man who had handled thousands of guests and even more difficult situations. But something about this moment felt different, something subtle but undeniable. Daniel Carter did not step closer, did not raise his voice, did not demand attention, and yet the entire lobby seemed to revolve around him. The silence was no longer passive, it was active, heavy, expectant. Victor forced a polite smile, the kind designed to smooth over tension. "Sir, if there is an issue, I would be happy to assist," he said, his tone measured, professional. But Daniel did not immediately respond. His eyes moved briefly across the room, taking in the halted conversations, the frozen screens, the staff standing uncertainly behind the desk, and then finally, he looked directly at Victor. "You already assisted," Daniel said quietly, and there was something in the way he said it that made the words land harder than any raised voice could have. Victor's smile tightened. "I am not sure I understand," he replied, though a faint tension had begun to creep into his voice. Daniel tilted his head slightly, as if considering how much explanation was necessary, but in truth, none was. "A woman came in here," he said, with a confirmed reservation. His tone remained calm, almost detached, but each word carried precision. "She was told she did not belong." The room seemed to contract around those words. Staff members exchanged quick glances. The receptionist looked down at the counter, her hands suddenly very still. Victor's expression shifted, just slightly. "If there has been a misunderstanding," he began, but Daniel raised a single hand, not aggressively, just enough to stop him. "There was no misunderstanding," Daniel said, and for the first time, there was a faint edge beneath his calm, not anger, but certainty, the kind that does not need to argue. Victor straightened, trying to regain control. "Sir, we maintain certain standards to ensure the experience of our guests," he said, repeating the same justification that had always worked before, the same reasoning that had built his reputation. But this time, the words sounded different, thinner, as if they had lost their weight the moment they left his mouth. Daniel's gaze did not waver. Standards, he repeated softly, almost as if testing the word. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, the movement unhurried, deliberate. He tapped the screen once, then turned it slightly so Victor could see. An internal dashboard, real-time data, operational systems, all linked to a single network. The Astoria Grand logo visible in the corner. Victor's eyes flickered, confusion giving way to something else, something sharper. "What is this?" he asked, his voice no longer entirely steady. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket. "The system you just lost," he replied, and as if on cue, another disruption rippled through the lobby. Lights dimmed for half a second before stabilizing. A soft alert tone sounded from the front desk. Then another, multiple systems attempting to reconnect and failing. Guests began to shift uncomfortably, murmurs spreading, the polished certainty of the hotel dissolving into uncertainty. Victor felt it now, fully, the control slipping, not dramatically, but undeniably, like sand through his fingers. "You cannot just walk in here and interfere with operations," he said, his voice sharper now, defensive, but Daniel remained unmoved. "I did not walk in," he said quietly. "I own the network that keeps this place running." And that was the moment everything changed. The words did not need to be loud. They did not need emphasis, because their meaning landed instantly, completely. Victor froze, his mind racing, trying to reconcile what he had just heard, the pieces falling into place too quickly. The sedan outside, the call, the timing of the system failure, the quiet confidence of the woman he had dismissed. The room went completely silent. Not a whisper, not a movement, just the weight of realization settling over everyone present. And Daniel took one small step closer to the desk, his voice calm, controlled, final. "Now," he said, "we are going to correct that mistake." Victor Hayes did not move, not immediately. His body remained upright, his hands resting lightly on the polished counter. But everything beneath that stillness had begun to fracture. The certainty he had carried for years, the quiet authority that had defined every decision. It was all unraveling in the space of a few seconds. And the worst part was not the disruption around him, not the failing systems or the watching guests. It was the realization forming in his mind, slow but undeniable, that he had misjudged the wrong person. Daniel. Carter did not raise his voice, did not demand an apology. Instead, he reached into his jacket once more, retrieving his phone with the same calm precision. He tapped the screen and held it at his side. "Restore guest access priority," he said quietly, not to Victor, but into the device, and almost instantly, the frozen screens behind the desk flickered back to life, the system responding not to panic, but to command. The receptionist gasped softly as the reservation list reappeared, faster this time, cleaner, as if the interruption had never been a glitch but a demonstration. "Pull up the Carter reservation," Daniel continued, his tone even. The receptionist hesitated only for a fraction of a second before typing, her fingers moving quickly now, guided by something stronger than routine. "I have it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Suite level, prepaid, confirmed." The words echoed more loudly than intended in the silent lobby. Victor's throat tightened. He glanced at the screen, seeing the details he had dismissed earlier, now undeniable, now impossible to ignore. Daniel turned his attention back to him. "So the room was available," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. Victor opened his mouth, searching for a response that would restore control, but nothing came. The explanations that once felt solid now sounded hollow even in his own mind. "I was maintaining standards," he finally said, though the words lacked the conviction they once carried. Daniel studied him for a moment, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling, clarity. Standards should never exclude dignity. He replied quietly, and that single sentence seemed to settle over the room like a final verdict. No one spoke, no one moved, because there was nothing left to defend. Outside, the black sedan still waited, its presence now understood by everyone inside, not as coincidence, but as part of something larger, something controlled. Daniel took a small step, closer to the counter, his voice lowering slightly, though it carried effortlessly through the silence. "You had a choice," he said. "And you made it quickly." Victor's shoulders stiffened, the weight of those words pressing down harder than any accusation. Daniel continued, "Now I will make mine." He turned slightly, speaking again into his phone. "Initiate full audit protocol for this property." There was a brief pause. Then a confirmation, and immediately, the atmosphere shifted again, not chaotic, not loud, but definitive. As if an invisible switch had been flipped, the systems remained online, but now every action, every record, every decision would be reviewed, not by chance, but by design. Victor felt it. The loss of control no longer subtle, but complete. His domain was no longer his, not in the way it had been just minutes ago. Daniel slipped his phone back into his pocket, his gaze returning to Victor one final time. "This is not about a room," he said, calmly. It never was. And for the first time, Victor understood the full weight of what had happened. This was not a complaint, not a difficult guest, not a misunderstanding that could be resolved with apologies or compensation. This was a line drawn, clear and irreversible, across the polished floor of the Astoria Grand. Daniel turned toward the doors without another word, his presence already shifting the energy of the space as he moved. The staff remained frozen, the guests silent, and somewhere in that stillness, the truth settled in, quiet but absolute, that everything in this place had just changed, and it had started with a single decision made in a moment of quiet arrogance. The doors closed softly behind Daniel Carter, but the silence he left behind did not fade. It deepened, settling into the marble floors and polished walls of the Astoria Grand like a weight no one could ignore. Victor Hayes remained where he stood, his reflection faint in the glossy surface of the counter, but he no longer looked like the man who had controlled this space just minutes ago. The confidence in his posture had shifted into something rigid, uncertain, as if he was holding himself together out of habit rather than certainty. Behind him, the receptionist stared at the screen, her hands hovering above the keyboard, unsure whether to continue working or wait for instruction that no longer seemed to come from him. The system was running again, but it no longer felt like theirs. It felt observed, monitored, as if every keystroke now carried consequence. A guest near the lounge cleared his throat softly, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the stillness. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice cautious, not demanding, just aware that something unusual had taken place. Victor turned slightly, forcing a composed expression. "Everything is under control," he replied, but the words lacked their usual authority, and everyone in the room could feel it, because control, once lost, does not return with words alone. It requires something deeper, something Victor no longer had, at least not in that moment. A notification chimed from the front desk system, then another. The receptionist glanced down, her eyes widening slightly. "Sir," she said, her voice tight. "The audit has already started." Victor's head turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "Started?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She swallowed, scrolling quickly. "Every transaction, every guest interaction, everything is being flagged for review." Her voice dropped even lower. "Including earlier tonight." The words landed with quiet finality, and for the first time, Victor felt the full weight of what had been set in motion. Not just a disruption, not just a warning, but a complete shift in oversight, the kind that did not ask for permission and did not wait for approval. It simply happened because it could, because someone with the authority to do so had already decided. Across the room, a staff member whispered to another, their voices barely audible, but the tension carried through the space like a current. The carefully curated image of the hotel, the seamless service, the quiet luxury, it all felt fragile now, as if one more moment could fracture it completely. Victor exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had built his career on recovering from difficult situations, on maintaining composure when others faltered, and part of him still believed he could regain control, that this could be contained, managed, resolved. But even as that thought formed, another notification appeared, this time on his own phone. He hesitated before looking at it, as if delaying the inevitable. Then finally, he unlocked the screen. The message was brief, direct, and unmistakable. Immediate review of managerial conduct initiated. There was no sender name, no signature, just the system itself. And that made it worse, because it meant this was not personal. It was procedural, structured, irreversible. Victor's grip on the phone tightened slightly, his mind racing through every decision he had made, every interaction, every moment he had justified as necessary. And now, those same decisions were being examined under a different standard, one he had not considered in that moment at the desk. The room remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of realization, slow, heavy, inescapable. Outside, the sedan engine finally started, the soft hum barely audible through the glass. And inside the car, Emily Carter sat exactly as she had before, calm, composed, her gaze steady as the city lights passed by. She did not look back at the hotel. She did not need to, because what had happened inside was no longer about her presence. It was about the consequence of a single decision. And as the car pulled away from the curb, the Astoria Grand remained standing, unchanged in appearance, but fundamentally altered in a way no one inside would soon forget. And in the center of it all, Victor Hayes stood still, understanding now, far too late, that the moment he had dismissed her, he had already set everything else into motion. The lobby no longer felt like a place of luxury. It felt like a place under observation, every movement slower, every word more careful, as if the air itself had changed. Victor Hayes stood behind the desk, but not in command, not anymore. His reflection in the polished surface no longer matched the image he had built over years, because authority, once questioned, does not return the same way. The receptionist continued scrolling through the system, her eyes moving quickly across lines of data. She did not fully understand but could clearly feel the weight of, "Sir," she said again, her voice tight with uncertainty. "They are pulling archived records now." Victor did not respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the screen, watching as flag markers appeared beside past transactions, interactions, timestamps, each one a reminder that what he once controlled privately was now visible, structured, evaluated, and worse, judged by a standard he had not applied when it mattered most. A guest approached cautiously, his tone polite but edged with discomfort. "Should we be concerned about our stay?" he asked. Glancing between the staff and the silent tension that had not lifted, Victor forced himself to respond, to reclaim something, anything. "Your stay will not be affected," he said, but even he could hear the difference in his voice, the absence of certainty, because this was no longer about guest experience. It was about accountability, and accountability does not negotiate. Across the lobby, another staff member stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They are requesting internal reports, all departments," she said. And this time, Victor did react, a small shift in his posture, a tightening of his jaw, because he understood what that meant. This was not a surface-level review. This was a full exposure of operations, decisions, patterns, everything. The kind of audit that does not look for mistakes. It reveals them, systematically, undeniably. The quiet murmur among guests grew slightly, not chaotic, but aware. The kind of awareness that spreads without words, a shared understanding that something significant had just occurred, and that they had witnessed the beginning of it. Outside, the city continued as always, unaware, indifferent, but inside the Astoria Grand, time felt slower, heavier, each second carrying consequence. Victor exhaled slowly, trying to gather himself, to think strategically, to find a path forward, but every direction led back to the same moment, the same decision, the same words he had spoken without hesitation. And now, those words echoed louder than anything happening around him. "People like you usually cannot afford this place." The memory surfaced uninvited, sharp, precise, and now impossible to justify. Behind him, the receptionist spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, there is more." Victor turned, his expression hardening slightly, bracing himself. "What now?" he asked, and she hesitated before answering, as if the words themselves carried weight. "They have identified the reservation and escalated it." Victor's eyes narrowed, confusion mixing with something deeper. "Escalated how?" he asked, and she swallowed, glancing at the screen once more before meeting his gaze. "It is marked as priority oversight, executive level." The words hung in the air, heavier than any system alert, because they confirmed what he already feared but had not fully accepted. This was not random. This was not a standard review. This was direct, intentional, and coming from a level of authority that did not engage unless necessary. The room fell quiet again, not with anticipation this time, but with understanding, the kind that settles in slowly but completely. Victor looked around the lobby, at the guests who now watched openly, at the staff who no longer waited for his direction, and for the first time, he saw the place not as his domain, but as something he had been entrusted with, something he had failed to uphold in a single, defining moment. Outside, the sedan disappeared into the flow of traffic, carrying with it the one person who had not raised her voice, had not demanded anything, and yet had changed everything. And inside, the consequences continued to unfold, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet precision that left no room for denial. And as Victor stood there, surrounded by systems he no longer controlled and decisions he could no longer undo, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was not the end of the situation. It was only the beginning of what would follow. The night settled over the city, but inside the Astoria Grand, no one moved the way they had before. The confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet awareness that every action now mattered, every word carried weight. Victor Hayes stood in the center of it all, no longer directing the flow, but standing within it, exposed to something far greater than his authority. The system alerts had slowed, not because the process had ended, but because it had moved deeper, quieter, more precise, the kind of precision that did not need to announce itself. It simply documented, evaluated, and decided. The receptionist finally stepped back from the terminal, her hands lowering slowly as if the screen itself had become something she did not fully understand anymore. "Sir, they have finalized the initial report," she said carefully, and Victor felt the words before he fully processed them, his gaze lifting, meeting hers. "What does it say?" he asked, though part of him already knew. She hesitated for only a moment, then answered, "Policy breach, discriminatory judgment, escalation recommended." Each phrase landed with quiet finality, not shouted, not emphasized, but impossible to ignore. Victor closed his eyes briefly, just for a second, not to escape, but to accept, because there was no argument left, no justification strong enough to stand against what had been recorded, what had been witnessed, what had been decided. Around him, the guests began to move again, slowly at first, conversations returning in softer tones. But the atmosphere had changed permanently. The illusion of perfection had been replaced by something more real, something more human, a recognition that even the most polished places are defined not by their luxury, but by how they treat those who walk through their doors. Outside, the city lights reflected against the windows of the moving sedan. Emily Carter sat quietly, her gaze resting on the passing skyline. She had not asked for anything, had not raised her voice, had not demanded recognition, and yet her presence had revealed something far more powerful than status. It had revealed character. Beside her, the city moved as it always did, unaware of the shift that had taken place. But within her, there was no anger, no satisfaction, only a quiet understanding that moments like this were never about proving worth. They were about revealing truth. Back at the hotel, Victor opened his eyes again, the weight of the moment settling fully. He looked around the lobby, seeing it not as a stage for perfection, but as a place where a single decision could define everything that followed. And in that realization, there was no escape, only consequence. He straightened slightly, not out of pride, but out of acceptance, because the outcome had already begun, and nothing he said now would change the moment that started it all. The silence returned once more, softer this time, not heavy with tension, but with clarity, the kind that lingers long after the moment has passed. And somewhere beyond the city lights, the story continued, not with noise, but with quiet impact, the kind that stays with those who witnessed it, reminding them that dignity is never something you grant. It is something you recognize, or fail to, and that failure always carries a cost. Respect is always revealed when you least expect it. If you believe in stories that uncover truth and dignity, hit like and subscribe because the next story might change the way you see the world. Thank you for watching.